Welcome to this video on designing performance pay plans. In this video, we're going to identify some of the main types of gain sharing plans, as well as goal sharing and profit sharing plans, and employee stock plans. And we're going to consider some of the key issues, including the advantages and disadvantages of some of these plans. And we're also going to look at some considerations in designing some non-monetary reward plans. Now, if we look at gain sharing plans, we've got four main types that are described in your textbook: the Scanlon plan and the Rucker plan, as well as ImperShare and the family of measure plans. So now, if we look first of all at the Scanlon plan, it basically is a plan that computes your labor cost as a percentage of total sales. So if a group can reduce the percentage of labor costs as a percentage of sales, then they can share in some of that gain. And usually, whatever that gain is that there is, if they reduce labor costs, whatever they're saving in terms of labor, normally management will split that with employees 50-50. But we have also seen in the Scanlon plans where workers can get up to 75% of that cost savings. Now, the other plan is the Rucker plan, and in some sense it's similar to the Scanlon plan, but it looks at labor costs as a percentage of value added to sales. So in other words, it calculates percentage of labor or the cost of labor as a percentage of value added. The value added component here is really sales less the cost of, say, things like raw materials and other direct inputs into the production process. So employees can really benefit here if they can come up with ways where they can purchase raw materials cheaper. So if they can save money on raw materials, not just their salaries or labor costs, but also raw materials, they can benefit. So again, then that savings, the labor costs as well as a reduced cost of inputs, whatever that savings turns out to be as a percentage of as a total amount, when it's calculated, can be split. And again, we usually find with Rucker plans, they can again be split 50-50. We don't tend to see, however, that they can be as rich for employees as the Scanlon plan, and I'm not sure why that is, but that just seems to be the history. Now, another plan that gained a lot of prominence in the 1970s was ImperShare, and it still is used, and its focus is on labor hours per unit of output. So they're really looking at how many labor hours it takes to manufacture or to produce a unit of output. So it's not looking at labor or productivity as a percentage of sales or percentage of value added, which is sales less inputs, as we did in Rucker. It's usually looking at how do we reduce the cost of labor for each unit of output that we produce. Okay. So, and again, the split between the worker and the company is again something that in a unionized environment, just as under Scanlon and Rucker, would have to be negotiated or determined by that group, those two groups, management and union, or management and employees if it's non-union. Then your last type of gain sharing plan would be what we call a family of measures plan. Really all that is, it's multiple independent measures that are looked at to see whether or not there's been any improvement. So it can be a combo of plans, and it could include things like customer service indicators. So has customer service gone up? It can also look at, labor cost savings, as we did with Scanlon and Rucker. It can also look at productivity improvements or decreased labor costs for each unit of output, as we did with ImperShare. It can look at a combination of things. It could even look at, achieving greater quality levels in product, decreasing accident rates, those kinds of things. And one of the major disadvantages, though, of the family of measures plan is that payout is usually based on goal achievement and not necessarily just cost savings. And sometimes, just because you achieve a goal, it doesn't necessarily relate to dropping company costs. So a lot of companies might say, well, if it's not going to contribute to something that they can readily see the benefit of in terms of cost, that's why sometimes they may not use a family of measures plan. But we do find that a lot of high involvement organizations that are wanting to get employees more involved, many of them do use some kind of family of measures plan. Now, what are some of the issues that we typically tend to find in designing some of the gain sharing plans? Well, first of all, one of the main issues is going to be in identifying or defining the group or work unit that's going to be included in the plan. A lot of times these gain sharing plans are in production or manufacturing type environments, and they only include the workers that are in production and not the office staff, right? How do we determine the bonus formula? That can be another issue, because a lot of times the bonus formula, although we want to keep it simple, we need to determine how we're going to split. So is our employees going to get 25% in management, or the company keeps 75% of the savings? What's it going to be? But the other thing that we need to think about as well, we also have to look at some of the elements that are going to help us determine what the bonus formula is going to be. So in other words, we could look at, say for example, in the ImperShare plan, where we're going to look at labor costs as a percentage of, or as a percentage of a unit produced, or how much labor goes into producing a unit. How are we going to determine what the bonus formula is going to be if we have decreased labor costs? So in other words, what's the formula going to be for bonus? How are we going to decide what they're going to share in? So that can sometimes be a difficulty or a little bit of a challenge. So for example, say we were looking at under ImperShare our labor costs as in relationship to a unit of output. And we decided that, hey, one way to reduce labor costs is to increase automation, right? So now we're going to go out and buy some new equipment, maybe refurbish the equipment that we have. So we need to say, well, where's that money coming from? It's going to come out of the profits, right? So you have a lot of these different things when you're looking at the bonus formula. And you might want to think about, well, if we're going to have to replace equipment or retool equipment, that cost needs to be factored into the formula, and that could affect your bonus payout. So employees can come up with a lot of great ideas to reduce labor costs and actually have it work. But when you look at the cost actually having to implement it, that's also got to be factored into the bonus formula, or else you'd be spending a lot of money, right, and not factoring that into any of the cost savings. So it needs to be factored in there before it gets allocated. The next thing we need to do, or need to think about in terms of an issue, is defining the baseline against which to measure our productivity improvements. So again, we need to determine, say for example, if under ImperShare, if we're looking at our labor costs per unit of output, we might want to look at what should the baseline be. And if we would decrease our labor costs by a certain percentage or by a certain amount in relationship to the baseline, then you're going to share. So it might not just be a percent or two that you're saving, but then we might have a baseline. You got to save over a particular baseline in order to make it worthwhile and for the company to really recognize profits that are worth sharing. So in any case, you have to decide on what the baseline is going to be. We mentioned earlier, item number 4 here, to determine the share between the company and the employees. Is it going to be a 50-50 split in savings? Is it going to be 25-75? What's it going to be? Okay. And look at the split among employees. So which employees are going to be eligible to share in the cost savings? So under ImperShare, if we save labor costs on every unit of output, who is eligible to save to participate in it, right? And what's the split going to be? Sometimes we find, as we said before, we might have problems of people who are freeloading and not really contributing much, right? So maybe there's some employee groups that might come up with savings, and other areas of the factory or the production unit might not participate in the savings because they didn't really have much to do with it. In item number 6, you also have to look at the frequency of the payout. This is really important because your pay is supposed to be, to an extent, motivating, right? We talked about things that make compensation motivating very early on in the course. So if people don't see a frequent payout that they believe is worth their while to work for, then, they might decide, well, maybe this isn't worth it. What we're contributing isn't worth it. So, you don't want to sometimes make the payout too frequent so that it really diminishes the reward. So say, for example, employees save, $50,000. If you divide that amongst 50 employees, that's $1,000. If you give it to them per pay and they get paid every week, it's not going to look as much every week as it might look at as you pay it out monthly or every 6 weeks. It'll look like it's a little bit more in their pay, so it might be a little more motivating. You also have to communicate. In item 7 here, one of the issues is developing procedures to communicate the results, because communication is critical in keeping employees up to date on how their efforts have actually contributed to cost savings, and that's an important factor in keeping them motivated. And to decide whether and how to incorporate employee participation. Many times we find that participation programs like employee suggestions or worker suggestions and how the labor cost reductions are going to be achieved is really important. It shouldn't just come from management. So if we don't have a strong enough way to get employees to participate, we might not find it's as successful. Now, there has been some evidence on this last item here, number 8, to suggest that in some cases where there is no element of employee participation, they do find success in gain sharing programs. However, you will notice better success in gain sharing programs if you do incorporate employees' participation mechanisms, and suggestion systems are just one of those kinds of things. Okay, now we're going to move on to goal sharing plans. And goal sharing plans are kind of like gain sharing to an extent. The difference in goal sharing plans and your gain sharing plans is, in essence, a goal sharing plan works when there are work groups or teams that will receive a bonus when certain specified performance goals are met. So goal sharing is a little bit different from gain sharing in several ways. In gain sharing, the cost savings are quantified and then shared between the company and the group. But under goal sharing, there's typically no systematic link between performance improvements and the goal sharing bonus pool. So, for example, how are you going to place monetary value on achieving the goal of increased customer satisfaction? We can say we want to increase it by X%, but is that necessarily going to contribute, or is it the only contributor to increasing profitability or reducing costs of a company? It's very, very difficult to do that. So we really just give you a bonus payment or something based on your meeting the performance goal, but there isn't necessarily any tie back to improved profits and that kind of thing. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to quantify. But the idea is, well, it's lost a little bit of popularity because of that from the company perspective. We do tend to find a lot of high involvement companies still using it. So let's talk about the 3 basic goal sharing plans we have. We have single goal plans, which we've got up here, the top one. And all we're doing there is maybe setting one goal for people to meet. So maybe the big issue for the company is increasing customer satisfaction. One of the negatives, of course, is that if you focus on just one goal, there might be other goals that the company wants to achieve that aren't necessarily going to be prioritized if we're focusing on one goal. We can also look at multiple goals. This is a little more popular if we look at multi-goals. So here what we would do is we would set up multiple goals that have to be set. So it might not just be, say for example, increasing customer satisfaction. It could be reducing accidents. It could be increasing sales. It could be a whole set of things that is really just important for the company to achieve. Sometimes if we set up too many goals, one of the drawbacks, of course, is that employees don't know where to focus. So we wind up prioritizing maybe 2 or 3 top goals as opposed to giving them 5 or 6. So I think the important thing is maybe not to make it a single goal, but to make it multi-goal, but to focus on 2 or maybe 3 key goals that employees have to achieve. That way it'll be easier to measure results as well, and then to bonus or provide some kind of merit pay to people for achieving the goals. The other thing we find is that we have another type of goal sharing plan, which could be what we say is financially funded. Now, so here with the financially funded, you would have a particular bonus amount that would be set by the company that's available for distribution. Sometimes it's usually a percentage of their profits or whatever, but the company would set that, and then the amount of the payout from that pool would be determined based on the level of goal achievement. All right. With single and multi-goal, we didn't necessarily talk about a pool of money being set aside, but we normally find that with any single or multi-goal, many of them are financially funded. We saw earlier in our discussions where, say, banks like the Royal Bank, they would use the financially funded system, whereby they would have multiple goals, which they would fund through a percentage of profits that the company might earn in the upcoming quarter or in a division or whatever, and then make that available to employees based on the degree to which they've achieved the goals. Okay, so that's basically how what the kind of goal sharing plans that a company could put in place. Some of the issues that are involved in designing goal sharing plans are very similar to the gain sharing ones, in that we have to define the group to which goal sharing applies. Is everybody going to be eligible or not? What's the nature of the goals to be sought? So again, what is it that they have to do? Is it going to be single? Is it going to be multi? What's it going to be? And how many goals are you going to focus on if it's multi? Again, you don't want to focus employees in 5 or 6 different directions. It's better to have maybe 2 or 3 key ones. Determine the levels and time frames for goal achievement. So when are you going to measure them? Again, this speaks to the frequency of the payout. Some companies might pay out monthly, some companies might pay out quarterly, but again, you want to make sure that it's frequent enough so that it continues to be motivating. And again, in terms of motivation, how much of the bonus are they going to be able to get? So in other words, we want to make sure that we let employees know what the amount is that they're eligible to get, so that there's a target for them to reach. We should also decide on the split of the bonus across employees. So again, are employees going to share evenly? Is there going to be certain groups that are going to share more? So maybe you might find that senior management has an opportunity to get more of a bonus than maybe employees at the lower level. What's going to be the split amongst the different employee groups? Are they all going to share evenly or not? So this concludes our discussion on gain sharing and goal sharing plans. In our next video, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a little bit more on profit sharing plans, and we're also going to look a little bit at employee stock plans as well. And if we have time in that video, we'll look at non-monetary reward plans. So stay tuned for the next series of videos.